was supposed to be routine. A classified military facility, tucked deep in the Nevada desert, was tasked with reviving an old monster, the engine of a B-2's Spirit stealth bomber that had sat silent for nearly a decade. The hangar was massive, cold, echoing. Every sound was swallowed by the metallic walls, every step felt heavy with expectation. The B-2 stood at the center like a sleeping beast, its matte black skin absorbing the fluorescent light above. To the untrained eye, it looked complete. Clean. Ready. But to those who knew her, really knew her, something was wrong. Her heart wouldn't beat. All the diagnostics said the engine should work. Fuel pressure. Normal. Electrical systems. Green. Thermal checks. Stable. There was no warning code. No leak. No overheating. And yet, every time they tried to start it, the engine gave a shallow click, and nothing more. The team was stumped. 3 different engineering units from the Air Force, the Navy, and a private defense contractor had been flown in. Some of the brightest minds in aviation stood over the console, eyes narrowed, fingers typing. Dozens of technicians swarmed the aircraft like surgeons over a patient refusing to wake. No one dared say it out loud. But tension hung in the air like smoke. This engine wasn't just malfunctioning. It was resisting. One of the engineers leaned back in frustration. "We're missing something," he muttered. "Something we can't see." The project manager, a woman who'd worked on classified systems for over 20 years, crossed her arms. "We've checked everything, twice. And we'll check it a 3rd time," someone else shot back. Hours passed. The team grew silent. Focused. Exhausted. Still, nothing. And in the far corner of the hangar, where shadows met mop water, a man was quietly sweeping the floor. No one paid him any attention. He wore a faded jumpsuit. His posture was slightly hunched. Thinning silver hair clung to the edges of his cap. He moved slowly, deliberately, almost like he'd been there for decades. To them, he was just the janitor. He wasn't on the manifest. He wasn't briefed on the mission. And certainly, he wasn't expected to contribute. But his eyes never left the B-2. Every time a technician opened a panel, he looked up. Every time the console sparked to life, he paused. And when the engine refused, again, he whispered something under his breath. No one heard it. But if they had, they might have noticed the tone. Not surprise. Not confusion. Something more like recognition. One of the younger engineers, in his late 20s, slammed a laptop shut. "It's like, there's a bypass we're not seeing." "Something analog," he said, shaking his head. "From an older version, maybe." The janitor's mop stopped moving. He turned slightly, just enough to glance at the engineer. Then he walked over to the edge of the yellow line, where support staff weren't supposed to cross. He didn't speak. Didn't raise his hand. He simply looked at the engine. Silence fell. At first, no one noticed him. Then the project manager caught his movement and frowned. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you can't be here." The janitor's voice was quiet. Barely above a whisper. But it cut through the tension like a blade. "You're missing the cold flow pre-ignition route," he said. On the 2nd-gen prototypes, it wasn't logged into the primary interface. The room froze. One of the senior engineers blinked. "What did you say?" The janitor stepped forward, his boots echoing softly on the polished floor. "The engine won't start unless you vent the auxiliary line manually first. It was patched in during the early test builds, then removed from the digital schema to prevent overburn on restart cycles." Another silence. This time, deeper. The kind of silence that comes when the impossible just happened. When someone completely unexpected, spoke a language no one else even knew still existed. The project manager narrowed her eyes. How do you know that? The janitor looked at the engine again. And for a brief moment, there was something in his expression, something like grief. I helped build it, he said. Then he turned back to his mop. And walked away. The project manager stood frozen, as if her mind was racing to confirm whether the words she'd just heard were real. The other engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Who was this man? And how did he know about a feature that wasn't even documented in the current blueprints? But before anyone could ask more questions, he had already gone back to mopping. Like nothing happened. Like he hadn't just dropped a technical truth that cut through months of encrypted files and redacted diagrams. Hours passed. They followed his suggestion. The auxiliary line he spoke of wasn't easy to find. It had been buried, literally, behind a sealed access panel. Covered by newer layers of plating. But it was there. Exactly where he said it would be. The team stared at the exposed tube like it was a ghost, something from a forgotten era. One of the younger engineers, a man named Keller, shook his head in disbelief. This isn't in any of the digital schematics, he muttered. Another technician cross-referenced all classified versions on file. None of them had that secondary line. Who the hell is that guy? Someone whispered. No one had an answer. Then, Keller said it, out loud. We're missing something, but it's not in the data. The janitor paused mid-mop. Just for a moment. He looked over his shoulder. Then stepped toward the diagnostics table, slow and steady. No one stopped him this time. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the weight of his presence. Or maybe, deep down, they sensed he knew this aircraft more intimately than anyone in the room. He didn't touch the console. Didn't reach for a keyboard. Instead, he leaned over the blueprint, an oversized printout used for team coordination, and pointed to a small, faded corner. A section labeled Prototype Revision, Redacted. His finger stopped on a line almost invisible to the eye. It wasn't ink. It was graphite, drawn by hand. A pencil mark. This, he said. You removed this connection in later models, but during early trials, it was essential for cold starts after long dormancy. No one responded. Not because they disagreed. But because some of them were starting to realize. He wasn't just someone who read these blueprints. He'd written them. The project lead stepped forward, eyes narrowed. How do you know about this line? These documents are classified. The janitor didn't flinch. He simply said. Because I drew that mark. With my own hand. 32 years ago. Gasps. Someone dropped a wrench. It clanged against the floor, echoing off the hangar walls. Keller leaned in, voice low. You worked on the early B-2 program? The janitor nodded. I didn't just work on it, he said. I was part of the design team for the propulsion integration on the prototype units. Before the government shifted the specs. Before the digital overlays. He looked back at the engine. Then, softer, almost like talking to an old friend, he whispered. She remembers what we built, even if you've all forgotten it. Silence swept the room again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was reverence. Because in that moment, everyone realized. They weren't dealing with just a janitor. They were standing next to a living archive. A man who held memories the system had erased. A mind that remembered things no machine could recreate. He walked back toward the cleaning cart. But before he left, he turned and said one last thing. You're not dealing with a broken engine. You're dealing with a machine that was built with intuition, not just code. She won't respond to logic alone. Then he nodded once. And disappeared down the hallway. The lead engineer finally spoke. "Bring me everything from the prototype archives. No more second guessing." They had to follow the ghost. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It waits until someone's ready to listen. The janitor who wasn't just a janitor. The command team didn't sleep that night. Orders were sent up the chain. Access was granted to archives long thought sealed. And one by one, the pieces began to fall into place. His name was Edgar L. Hartman. Age, 68. Status: civilian contractor. Position: janitorial staff at Site 27 for the past 19 years. But that wasn't the full story. They pulled older records, classified service logs from over 3 decades ago. And there it was. Hidden beneath redactions and security codes. Hartman, Edgar L. Lead propulsion technician, Project Thrive. A sub-program within the early B-2 development initiative. One file stood out. A test log dated March 1989. Prototype ignition failure. Operator Hartman injured in backblast. Hospitalized. Cleared for partial duty. Classified clearance suspended pending review. That was the last technical entry attached to his name. After that, he disappeared from the defense records. As if the system had simply erased him. But he didn't disappear. He just changed doors. 6 years later, a custodial worker named Edward L. H. applied for a maintenance job at a nearby aerospace facility. No red flags. No questions asked. He never corrected anyone who called him just a janitor. When the team read his file, no one said a word for a full minute. Keller, the young engineer, finally broke the silence. He was there at the beginning. The project manager nodded slowly. He didn't just build this engine. He lived it. They found his old workshop notes in the prototype logs. His sketches. His initials on flow diagrams no one had been able to decode. Tiny pencil marks, HEL. Tucked into the margins like quiet signatures on a forgotten masterpiece. Suddenly, everything changed. The questions. The mystery. The hesitation. Now, there was only respect. And a growing sense that they had overlooked someone, who had never stopped watching over the machine. The next morning, they invited him back. He declined at first. Said he had mopping to finish in Hangar C. But when they insisted, when they told him they'd uncovered the logs, he paused. Then, he nodded. And walked with them to the heart of the project once more. In front of the engine, surrounded by a dozen engineers half his age. He didn't boast. Didn't point fingers. Didn't ask for recognition. He just looked at the B-2's open core. And closed his eyes. "I remember the sound she made," he said quietly. "Not the roar, everyone hears that. I mean the breath. The hum, right before the fire lights." No one interrupted. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was reverence. Because somehow, the man who swept the floor had memorized the heartbeat of a ghost. They asked why he never returned to the research team. Why he vanished from every briefing, every project. He shrugged. "After the injury, I wasn't cleared for sensitive work anymore. Too risky. They said. Too much exposure to classified systems." He paused. "Truth is, I stopped caring about the title. Didn't need a lab coat. Didn't need a desk. I just wanted to be near her. The thing we built. The thing we gave our lives to." Keller looked at him, stunned. "You've been here this whole time. Watching us struggle. And you knew." Hartman gave a tired smile. "No one asked. And I didn't want to get in the way. Then he placed one hand, gently, on the cold housing of the engine. She's stubborn. Always was. You don't start her with brute force. You listen to her. The team watched in awe as he traced a few steps back in the diagnostic process. Not with high-tech tools. Not with software. But with memory. The kind of memory forged not in classrooms, but in years of sweat, burns, setbacks, and silent victories. By the end of the day, they had restructured the startup sequence. Not according to code. But according to intuition, his intuition. And for the first time in 9 years. The B-2's engine whirred. Hummed. Then growled awake, soft, low, and alive. The engineers erupted in cheers. But Hartman just stepped back. Quiet. Hands behind his back. Eyes glinting with something that looked a little like pride, and a little like pain. Because this machine, this stealth ghost, was never just metal to him. It was memory. It was blood. It was family. When memory fixes what technology can't. There was no blueprint for what came next. No manual. No checklist. No approved procedure. Just a quiet agreement among the team. They would follow his instructions. The janitor, the man once erased from the records, stood beside the diagnostic panel. Not as a technician. Not as a superior. But as a guide. He pointed to the auxiliary lines. The flow regulators. And a buried switch beneath a reinforced plate. Remove that, he said softly. It's not broken. It's just sleeping. They worked for hours. With precision, they reconstructed the deleted bypass. The missing pressure line was real. The overlooked ignition loop, real. And the subtle shift in thermal routing he remembered. Also real. Piece by piece. They brought the past back to life. Not by invention. But by restoration. Not by algorithms. But by memory. Keller and the others watched in silent awe. As the system slowly took shape. Everything he had said matched perfectly. It wasn't luck. It wasn't guessing. It was a man who once walked with the machine. And still remembered its breath. Then came the moment of truth. They closed the access panels. Ran safety checks. Held their breath. The command was given. Start sequence. Test run. Attempt ignition. At first. There was only silence. A soft hum. Then. A click. A tremble. A whispering whir. And finally. A low. Rising growl. As the engine came alive. Not a violent roar. Not a screech. But something deeper. Like a voice returning. After years of silence. The entire hangar stood still. The B-2's engine pulsed. Steady and strong. Alive. Awake. Listening. Cheers erupted. Technicians shouted. Some clapped. Some stared, wide-eyed and speechless. But in the center of it all. Hartman just stood there. No reaction. No pride. Just a slow breath through his nose. Like an old man watching a lost friend come home. The commanding officer stepped forward. He held out his hand. Thank you, he said, voice thick with emotion. You've done what no system, no team, no simulation could do. Hartman looked at the hand. Then looked at the engine. And finally. He smiled. Not a grin. Not a smirk. Just a soft, tired smile that carried years of history behind it. He shook the officer's hand once, firm, respectful. Then turned around. And walked back toward his cleaning cart. No applause followed him. He didn't want any. As he passed Keller, the young engineer whispered, "How did you remember all that?" Hartman didn't stop walking. But he answered, "You don't forget the sound of something you built with your soul." She was more than a machine. She was ours. And I just listened. He reached his mop, picked it up, and disappeared behind the hangar doors. That night, the B-2 engine stayed running. No faults. No errors. No questions. Because something had changed. Not in the aircraft, but in the people who built it. And those who had forgotten how it began. Not all fixes come from technology. Some come from memory. From hands that once built with grease, not code. From men whose knowledge was buried, not by time, but by bureaucracy. But memory has its own kind of blueprint. One you can't erase. The next day, he didn't come back. No one saw him at the morning briefing. No one heard the soft rhythm of his mop on the hangar floor. The maintenance crew checked the staff board. His name tag was gone. Just like that. He had disappeared. At first, they thought he might have just taken a day off. But by noon, a junior officer opened his locker, looking for contact information. What they found inside left them silent. Tucked carefully between a folded rag and a worn-out thermos was a notebook. Leather-bound. Faded. Pages yellowed with age. No labels. No security warnings. Just a name, scrawled in black ink. E. L. Hartman. Inside the notebook, hand-drawn sketches. Diagrams. Formulas written in the margins. Corrections in red. Notes on airflow, thrust curves, ignition delays. It was a history. A hidden history. Every page documented the evolution of the B-2 engine. From its unstable beginnings in the late 1980s to the sleek phantom it had become. There were things in that book no engineer in the room had ever seen. Test cycle notes. Unpublished fixes. Insights into the heartbeat of the machine. Not from machines, but from a man. Keller sat on a bench, notebook in hand, turning each page like it was sacred. He looked up at the project lead. Why didn't anyone know? Why was none of this recorded? The answer came from the oldest engineer in the room. Because sometimes the most valuable knowledge is held by those the system forgets. They searched for him, but there was no address. No phone number. No family listed. It was as if Hartman had lived only for the machine, and vanished once it no longer needed him. There were no headlines. No military honors. No medals awarded. No press conference. But that week, the B-2 flew again. She rose off the runway with grace. Silent. Precise. Unseen. Exactly as she was meant to. And none of it would have been possible without the quiet man with silver hair and a mop in his hands. The officers who watched the takeoff that day stood in silence. Not because of the aircraft, but because of the ghost behind it. Later, in a small side office, they framed one page from the notebook. A sketch of the engine's core, with a single line circled in pencil. The one that no one else had noticed. Below it, they engraved. Some knowledge is never lost, only waiting to be remembered. E. L. Hartman. Years passed. The notebook was studied. Scanned. Preserved in digital archives. It became part of training manuals, engineering briefings, and simulation protocols. But they never changed the original. They left the handwriting intact. They left the smudges. The margin notes. The coffee stains. Because it wasn't just data. It was a man's soul. Pressed into paper. Over a lifetime of silence. And those who read it could still hear his voice. Between the lines. Not loud. Not proud. But steady. Just like the machine he helped bring to life. In time, few remembered his face. Fewer still remembered his full name. But in Hangar 7. Where that B-2 still sleeps between missions. A mop leans quietly against the far wall. Untouched. Undisturbed. As if waiting. Because some legacies don't need parades or medals. Some legacies live in the hum of an engine. The silence of a machine. And the memory of those who finally remembered. The man who never asked to be remembered. Backhand index pointing right CTANs. If you think an ordinary person can't change anything, you probably haven't heard of him. Share this story, so no one is forgotten in silence. Honor the path. Even when it disappears from the records.